Overlooking the West Bank city of Nablus is Mount Gerizim, the cradle of many historical and religious events to which these ancient rocks bear witness. And as this mountain remained intact for millions of years, so have the members of an ethnic group of people who've remained strongly united by their amazing faith. Even though inescapably linked to Judaism, their religion is considered fundamentally different. They are the Samaritans, who identify themselves as primarily Palestinians and refuse to be called Jews. Despite having Torah as a fundamental text, they consider their Pentateuch as the only original and genuine version of the Holy Book, a version that they faithfully preserve through the centuries. Consequently, they believe that they represent the one true Israelite religion and that they are the direct descendants of the Israelites. They also have their own language, Samaritan Hebrew, which is an ancient language that Hebrew of today is derived from. It is considered one of the oldest languages in the world and has only 22 letters, each corresponding to a human body part. The word Samaritan means keeper, as members of this sect are supposed to guard the long-standing version of the Old Testament, which was written on deerskin parchment over 3,600 years ago. Nobody knows the exact location of the scripture except for the Samaritan high priest. After their exodus out of Egypt, the Samaritans wandered across Sinai Peninsula for 40 years before settling in Palestine, a journey that is annually commemorated during the Passover ceremony, which is also known as the Pesach. During the Passover, Samaritans celebrate their ancestors escaping ancient Egypt and breaking free from the Pharaoh's chains of slavery. On the 14th day of the first month of the Samaritan calendar, the mountaintop of Gerizim becomes the ceremonial ground for the traditional Passover sacrifice. As everyone gathers to mark the Passover, adults keep a close eye on the ceremony's preparations, as well as on the outsiders. Who come here to watch the practices of the world's smallest religious community, as only 800 Samaritans remain in the whole world today. Being a religious minority, every member of the community is involved in the ceremonial preparations, which begins by burning wood and tree branches and throwing them into fire pits. Then comes the key ritual of the sacrifice itself. This sacred site is where the offerings are presented, exactly like prophets Noah and Abraham offered theirs in the past. According to Samaritan tradition, the summit of Gerizim is the altar where Noah made his thanksgiving sacrifice after the flood, and where Abraham offered to sacrifice his son Isaac to God. At the altar, worshippers are unified in the color of purity, all dressed in white. They pay great attention to the instructions of their priests as they closely inspect the works in progress and check on the 55 selected animals that will be sacrificed in accordance to the Toraic text. Meanwhile, elder devotees await their high priest, who arrives after everything is set. Here he comes, signaling the beginning of the sacrificial Passover in recited and chanted prayers. At sunset, the high priest announces the start of the ritual sacrifice, which is dedicated to God saving their Israelites ancestors after their exile from Egypt. The proceedings of the sacrifice start simultaneously. Afterwards, men start dabbing the spilled blood and smear some of it onto their foreheads, a ritual that's followed by greetings, hugs, dances, and Samaritan songs. Once the ritual sacrifice is over, all efforts combine as everyone actively takes part in what comes next. Only Samaritans are allowed inside the busy altar, where each gets engaged with an assigned task that complies with their inherited sacred traditions, which have been passed on from generation to generation. After the sacrifice, animals are skinned and gutted. And while the wool and intestines are thrown into a big central fire pit, wooden skewers are prepared to pierce through the body of each animal. This part of the sacrificial ceremony has always attracted tourists who come to watch Samaritans carry out their preparations for the feast, a tradition that is now the showpiece of the Passover holiday. On long sticks of wood, carcasses are carried over to the grilling area, and it's time now for the two pillars of the Pesach to come together. The 55 slaughtered offerings inside the deep 5 fire pits. Circling around the fire pits, Samaritans wait for the signal in order to plunge the skewers inside, all in unison at the same time, in a manner similar to their ancestors leaving Egypt, together and at once. Then the sunken fire pits are covered with pieces of cloth. Mud is used as the second layer in sealing the heat deep inside. It's a collaborative effort and everyone has a job to do. The cooking process takes around 3 to 4 hours. Afterwards, the meat is dug out to be eaten, marking the end of the Passover. A week later, after the Passover, Samaritans are ready for the pilgrimage to the holy sites on Mount Gerizim. It is one of 3 annual pilgrimages, with this one being the first. Then, the Shavuot pilgrimage, which celebrates the anniversary of the Torah. And finally, the Sukkot pilgrimage. dawn, worshippers gather at synagogues. A Samaritan prayer mainly depends on meditation, redemption, and pleas for forgiveness. Prayers are performed twice a day, at dawn and at sunset, where each prayer consists of 7 rounds of kneelings. There are 613 commandments among the Samaritans' Pentateuch, divided into 365 prohibitions and 248 obligations. Worshippers then leave the synagogue and head off to the summit of Mount Gerizim on foot, announcing the beginning of their pilgrimage season. The Samaritan Faith is based on 5 pillars: the belief in one God, the prophecy of Moses, the authority of the 5 books of the Torah, or what's known as the Pentateuch, the holiness of Mount Gerizim, and finally, the belief in the Judgment Day. The Samaritans arrive to the top of Mount Gerizim, where many of the holy sites are centered, especially the Temple of Moses, which according to biblical teachings was built by Moses in Sinai and transported by Joshua to Mount Gerizim. There is also the altar of Isaac, where Abraham was about to sacrifice his son to God. Despite being the smallest religious community in the world, Samaritans are committed to preserving their identity and keeping their legacy alive, as they strive to stand apart from both Judaism and Zionism. No matter how much you know, there is more awaiting to be uncovered, because we live in
العالم كبير.